Welcome to the latest installment of the Sharp Best Ball Show. I am your host, Tod Burros, and you can find me on Twitter at BestBallNFL. And I will be joined today by Matt Harmon of Reception Perception at Matt Harmon DFB. I hope I said that right. I want to know more about wide receiver this year, as I don't scout them as well as I do running back tape. And I was always impressed by Matt's ability to find wide receivers who would be good before they became popular. In fact, it's the theme for his website, finding people that wide receivers that are good before the league catches on. And again, I don't know that I said that exactly right, but I'm really looking forward to digging into Matt's process to help us find those crucial wide receivers whose metrics are better than their average draft position might be, as well as hitting on those who are really popular, but that RP, Reception Perception, is not quite as enthusiastic about. If you want to learn more, go to Matt's site at receptionperception.com and make sure you don't just look at the cool charts, including the ones we'll show you today, but that you actually read the articles so that the context comes to life. It's only $30 for the year to get all his stuff. And so he's charting everything, a bunch of wide receivers from last year, as well as a bunch of the rookies who you need to know more about. That's going to help us to draft better on our best ball sites, including Underdog Fantasy. And speaking of Underdog Fantasy, this show is brought to you by Underdog and the biggest fantasy football tournament of all time, Best Ball Mania 4. Don't know what Best Ball is? It's simple. You just enter Best Ball Mania on Underdog's slick mobile app, draft your team, and that's it. Yep, it's set it and forget it, as Underdog optimizes your weekly lineup to create the highest scoring one. It's here, it's Best Ball Mania 4, and it's your shot at a first place prize of $3 million. Get signed up on UnderdogFantasy.com or via the App Store and use the code SHARPKIT, and they'll not only double your first deposit up to $100, but you'll also receive the Sharp Football Draft Kit for just $1. That includes over 40 exclusive fantasy football articles, which will help your chances at winning the $3 million grand prize. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code SHARPKIT. So let's bring Matt in and try and dig in and help you to win all that money that's out there, Matt. There's so much of it.
There is so much of it. I appreciate you having me on, man. I'm really excited about this conversation because you and I have gone back and forth over the years about wide receivers and some of what Reception Perception is trying to point us to. So I'm hoping we can. I mean, hey, that's a lot of pressure. I'm hoping we can help some people point them in the right direction to try to win some of these best ball tournaments, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've just been super impressed, right? And anyone who listens to me knows I don't just say things because I have a guest. I mean, the work Matt does is really, really helpful. And, you see these charts, and we're going to put up a bunch of them when we're talking about players when you, on Twitter. But you also break down, Matt, the success rate versus the different types of coverage. And to me, that is a very important thing, and you rate them according to everyone else, correct?
Correct, yeah. I mean, I'd have to look actually at the historical databases again to see exactly how many players I have logged since 2014 or how many seasons I've logged of some guys obviously repeat year over year, of course.
Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, right, Tyler Lockett, of course. But how many of these guys? I think it's like 400 players now at this point, almost 100,000 routes since 2014. So, and I think that's the great part about it is having, a rubric to when you're watching tape and when you're, studying these guys as route runners and how successful they are against different forms of coverages. And really it all starts at like what position they line up at. Positional archetypes I think are still not really as well understood as they could be within fantasy circles. So having like years of backlog to compare that to, a database to compare that to, I think is really important for trying to figure out where these guys, where they win, where they're good at, and also, of course, then projecting that into the future for fantasy and multiple years down into their career for some of these rookies as well.
Yeah. And one thing I like about it so much is we constantly get these nonsensical conversations on Twitter of the advantage of numbers versus tape. And what I love about reception perception is you're taking tape and putting it into numbers, right? So yes, obviously there's some objectivity and things of that nature. But as you mentioned, you've hit on a lot of guys because the data showed it, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. And I'm looking back at it now. It's 400 since just a couple days ago. It's 419 player seasons in the reception perception database, and 50. I was a little aggressive on the route one. 53,000 routes, over the course of reception perception history. So it is quite a lot of players, that's for sure. And
one more, and you'll be 420 friendly.
Exactly right. That would be great. I wonder who the 420th player is going to be. You
got to pick someone who got busted for weed.
Yeah, if only Josh Gordon.
Not that they do that anymore.
Season. No, now you don't get busted as much. But I'm hoping to actually hit 80 total guys, including the rookies, before the season, because what time? This is the time of year, Todd, when we're getting guys popping up in training camp, right? That okay, let's really see how good this guy is. Can he really excel in a new type of role? So I'm hoping to get some of those guys. But yeah, just over the course of reception perception history, one of the things that when I originally started the project, and it was about 10 years ago now at this point, when I started coming up with the idea before putting any content out in the year 2014 is when the content first started rolling out. One of the thoughts was obviously I thought that this was kind of a niche space that nobody was really covering. Like, what are wide receivers doing when they run off the screen on Sunday, right? Like, if you're a receiver, you're lucky to get 10 targets in a game, like really lucky to get 10 targets in a game. But you're running like 30 plus routes. You're playing 60 plus snaps. What are you doing? Like, somebody should be giving them credit for what they're doing on those plays, even if they don't get the ball, because of factors that they cannot control. Quarterback play, offensive line doesn't give the quarterback enough time. The play design is designed to go somewhere else, but they still executed the route at a high level. So that was part of it. But also, yeah, it was like, to me, I thought we could have a real edge for fantasy if we could try to find these guys that were getting open at a really high level before the targets started to come. And really that first season putting out content was a guy like Allen Robinson, in his rookie season. We think of Robinson.
Your first love.
My first guy. Yeah, it was
your first love. There's nobody like your first guy.
There's nobody like your first. Yeah. And for him, it was just his success rate versus man coverage specifically. And I still think that's our best and most predictive metric in reception perception, and we've done studies to back that up. His success rate versus man was pretty similar to other like NFL star players that I was charting that year too. And I think that now is even we can better do that now with other metrics because of the multiple players that we have in the database. So yeah, that's obviously one exciting thing about it is just trying to see these guys pop before the stats follow them, whether it be situation or anything else.
Let me follow that up a little bit, and to make sure that I got that right. Are you saying that charting success versus man is more indicative of success than zone, or did I misunderstand that?
So Josh Scott, who's one of the subscribers to the site, he's a data scientist. I'm sure I'm getting his actual job title wrong there, but essentially he's an economist, PhD.
Guy with brain.
The whole thing. Guy with bigger brain than me. Guy with bigger brain than me.
Guy with brain.
He put a study up on the site and it's very in depth and academic heavy. So I would encourage people to go find it. It's just what matters in reception perception, and it does kind of depend. Like overall, the answer is yes. Success rate versus man is more predictive of future success than success rate versus zone. But with everything, there's a gray area there, and it does kind of depend. So for example, this is what I said about.
Yeah, it's a general rule, not
right.
Because every guy. So I'm going to follow that, and you can keep the train of thought you were going on. But is it because if you can get open with man, you can learn zone? Whereas if you're good at getting open in a zone, you might still not be able to separate against man.
I definitely think that is part of it. And then I think you could also ask yourself the question, though, for guys that are zone beaters. We can go with like 100 different directions here, but for guys that are like zone beaters,
I'm sorry, I'm throwing too
no,
much.
that's okay. This is what I'm thinking about all day long, so it's fine. If for guys that are zone beaters, do they age a little bit more gracefully than these guys who, are working with more quickness and speed and outside against man coverage? A guy like Keenan Allen, I think, is going to be a good test case for that this upcoming season. But what I was going to say about the part of where it depends is it depends on where they line up. That's what I mentioned about positional archetypes are so important, and I still think kind of not totally discussed enough in fantasy circles. So if you're an outside receiver, it matters more if you can beat man coverage than it does zone coverage. Great example is a guy like Mike Evans, who's never been the best zone coverage receiver because he's playing at the X receiver spot where he runs against a lot of tight physical press man coverage and doesn't have the benefit of working the outside as much. Just because the sideline is right there. He's tethered to that one position. It's harder to beat zone coverage from there. So it matters a lot more if he can beat man press coverage. And then on the flip side, if you're a slot receiver or if you're an off-ball flanker receiver, it matters more. That's when zone coverage becomes more important and more predictable. So for players that are going to beat a ton of zone coverage, if they're not the best man beaters, but they're also lining up in the slot, it doesn't make sense to ding them about their success rate versus man as much as it does for guys who are going to line up a ton outside. So that's sort of it depends part of the analysis.
I love that. That was something I did not know, and I probably should have, and helps me to understand not just this conversation, but my continued study on your site. So, and the next question I had was very tied into that. How important is getting open, do you find? In other words, how have your results on guys who get open early in their career or in college led to success versus times where someone can do it, but he still doesn't do much? I mean, obviously, someone who can get open has a better chance of success than someone who doesn't.
Yeah, right. Like just inherently, it makes sense. Like getting open 100% matters, right? Because if you're not able to get open at a high rate, it's tougher to get the ball to those players, period. Now, some guys like Kadarius Toney's in the news right now. He's a great example. He's not a traditional route runner. He's not a traditional guy that's going to get open against man coverage. He's even kind of hit or miss against zone coverage. So because of that, these gadget type players, you have to find and manufacture ways to get them the ball. And that's difficult because it disrupts the routine flow of the offense. So I think it's just inherently important. Now for guys,
I just want to throw in, right? So, I mean, gadget plays typically happen on first, maybe second down, right?
Yeah.
Third down, you're looking to convert. And most of the time, you're going to send multiple receivers out into coverage and not pick your gadget guy is the first read. So, with there only being 3 downs, I think that might have something to do with why it makes it even tougher for those guys to get targets.
100%. And we also know, and this comes back to the man coverage part of it too, that man coverage rates rise on third down. They go up in the red zone. They go up into the closer you get to the end zone. So those crucial high leverage situations, that's why it becomes even more important for you to have an ability to beat man coverage. Because if you're just and also man coverage success rate is lower than the average success rate against zone coverage. So that just goes again to why that man coverage number is so important. To that point, when you look back at the reception perception database, there's really only 2 guys that have cleared 75% success rate versus man coverage and not had like 1,000-yard season. And that's kind of an arbitrary number, but it is what it is.
Well, I got to ask who they are.
I will go tell you who they are. One is Sterling Shepard. a guy who just has never been able to stay healthy. And the other is Curtis Samuel, who had like a top 30 fantasy season, but a lot of it was rushing induced with Carolina. Good player, but not really necessarily like a star receiver. You can also look at some of the Curtis Samuel stuff. It was not really a zone coverage beater either, and so he's kind of a bit of an enigmatic player, but I think a very good number 3 there.
Yeah, I think enigmatic is a tremendous way. And I thought they were going to use him better in Washington, but so far he wasn't able to stay healthy. Let's get to some of these players and some of these charts. You guys, what I've done is I've picked a variety of guys that highlight different parts of reception perception, and also guys that I have questions on. But again, for $30, go sign up. There's a ton of other players. But Matt, I want to start with Davante Adams. There was a lot of talk about him leaving Aaron Rodgers, and he just had another great year. But what did reception perception show about Adams? And what are your thoughts with him with Jimmy Garoppolo this year? Is it he's falling in drafts. Do you think he should be getting dinged going from Derek Carr to show my age a little bit. Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo?
So I think this is a great example of why reception perception is a valuable tool. Like literally the goal is to isolate the wide receiver from surrounding variables. And this was a great test case last year with, okay, is Davante Adams at all a product of Aaron Rodgers? I think reception perception would have told you flat out, hard, aggressive, no. You look at Davante Adams, the run from 2018 to 2000.
That's a lot of green up on the screen.
A lot of green. Davante Adams from 2018 to 2022, his success rate versus man coverage, 79.5%, 78%, 79.5%, 79.6%, and 78.1% last year with the Raiders. Those are all 95th percentile and better scores. The 79.5 and 79.6%, those are like 99th percentile. Those are some of the best recorded scores in RP history. I mean, this is a guy who has been one of the best receivers of his era. Yeah, those 79.6 and 5%, those are the 7th, 8th, and 9th best scores all time since 2014 that have been doing reception perception. So yeah, this guy is not a product of quarterback play. Clearly a guy who wins on his own. And the interesting thing from the route chart there, you see he's not going to have that same vertical ability, vertical deep ball success, I should say, with Jimmy Garoppolo, because we know that's not Jimmy Garoppolo's game. He's not going to push the ball vertically. He's not going to push the ball deep outside the numbers. But the slant route success rate, the curl route success rate, and the dig route success rate that he had are all extremely high, especially slant curl, over 90%. Incredibly high, some of the best over the last 2 years. And when you look at the dig route, though, it was one of his most frequently run routes relative to the NFL average, and he had a really good success rate. Deebo Samuel and Jimmy Garoppolo have made a ton of huge plays on dig routes against zone coverage specifically, but also against man coverage at times, running the dig route. And for all of Jimmy's flaws, he will rifle that ball over the middle of the field with no fear. Sometimes it gets him into trouble, but a lot of times he's able to hit those plays. I think those are the moments where you're going to see.
He throws slants very well.
Slants and digs, baby. Slants and digs. And I think that's really going to be where Adams and Garoppolo find their best fit together.
And the other thing, I love Jimmy Garoppolo coming out, and I loved his quick release. And I think that's something that you want to talk about, something that's really underrated in quarterback play, because if you can get the ball out of your hand quickly and actually be accurate, you're going to give those receivers a lot more opportunity for run after the catch. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I think Adams had his moments as a yak guy. I think he's still really underrated as a tackle breaker, but he's had a lot of moments as a yak guy in kind of that Matt LaFleur version of the offense with the Green Bay Packers. And Josh McDaniels comes from a different tree, but I think Garoppolo's quick release, his ability to win on slant routes, it's going to set Adams up for more yak opportunities than some of the vertical routes he was running last year with Derek Carr, who I think can be a little gun shy at times, but is pretty physically talented, has a lot of arm talent as well to push the ball down the field when he wants to.
All right. So I think, basically I've been buying the dip on Adams, and there's nothing that I heard here that makes me think I'm doing something wrong. Speaking of Aaron Rodgers, though, Garret Wilson has been a pretty big target of mine, as we've seen how, one thing about Rodgers that I do think matters is, we've heard it for years. He throws the ball to the guys he can trust. And he can really just feed a lead guy. Let's talk about your reception perception on Mr. Wilson, and if you share my enthusiasm for his prospects for this year.
I love Garret Wilson. I was a huge fan of him from his college reception perception profile when he was an incredible, zone beater, incredible man beater in college, showed an ability to win against press coverage. And he's also, I think the most underrated part of his game is that he's freaky after the catch. Like, he's basically Kadarius Toney, but if Kadarius Toney could run routes. He's not quite as bendy as Toney, but he's that good after the catch. He's that good in the open field. The best indicator by a landslide for Garret Wilson in his rookie year reception perception profile, 81.2% success rate versus press coverage. Todd, the following rookies have hit 80% success rate versus press since 2014 in reception perception history. CeeDee Lamb, Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham, and now Garret Wilson. That's not a bad list to be on. No. So if Rodgers can't trust this guy, I don't know. I don't know what we're doing.
I started pushing him up even to 111, 112. I think Rodgers is a great candidate for a comeback of the year. They really didn't let him throw the ball last year. The last 2 years, it's been a much more run heavy than historically, and I am wheels up on Garret Wilson this year, and I'm so glad that you had a similar take on it. I think he could break the league this year.
Superstar trajectory, no question about it. He could, if he's not considered there already, which tough to say after somebody's rookie season, but I think by the end of the season he will absolutely be in that superstar tier, knocking on top 10 receiver in the league. And there's even a receiver from that draft class I think is better than Garret Wilson. So it's kind of crazy. It was a great class that year.
Well, if I don't ask and we don't get to him, you got to let me know.
I will.
Is it his? Is it also an OSU guy?
It just might be.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's a guy maybe that I should be taking more of. Let's just talk about it because I didn't have a Chris Olave question. So you are even higher on Chris Olave than you are on Garret Wilson, or are you talking JSN?
Oh, I'm talking Chris Olave, and I think Olave, I liked him just a little bit better as a prospect, so it does come there. I think that, again, that success rate versus press number from Garret Wilson's rookie season is incredibly important, and the after-catch stuff, there's no question that, Garret Wilson's a better yak player than Chris Olave. That's without a doubt. That's not really Olave's game, but I come back with, guys like Olave and Tyler Lockett that go, well, yeah, they're not yards after catch players. Well, who cares? They're winning 14 yards down the field on dig routes. They don't need, on real big boy routes. They don't need these bunny hop catches.
Or 25 yards downfield on a bomb.
Exactly. Yeah. And no kidding. They don't have kidding. They don't have yards after catch.
Yeah. So no. And again, I agree. And people, that's where, again, something that I just love the way you do things is, you're balancing all the factors, not trying to make a hot take on a sliver of it. So that's really good. Let's move over to the Chargers. What did reception perception show on Quentin Johnson? Because to me, he was my favorite tape at times, and then he was also at times, I felt like he was a guy who plays much smaller than his height, which is a good thing. But to me, I love secret value. And I thought to myself, man, if this guy could actually learn to play with his size, along with what else he does,
the rim.
He could wreck the league.
He's a fun player because I'm with you that at times he's the most fun receiver to draft. Enigmatic. We used that earlier. Definitely enigmatic is a player like Quentin Johnston, who I think, his yak stuff might not necessarily translate as well to the league as it did from TCU, just coming from that conference. You're never sure. And I think there are ups and downs to his reception perception profile. Like negatives, success rate versus zone, 12th percentile among college prospects charted for reception perception.
I'm guessing that's not good.
No, not good. 72.8%, not good. His success rate on curls, on comebacks, on dig routes, pretty low. Like if he's going to be an NFL wide receiver 1, those are going to have to jump up. Those are going to have to improve, especially because he's probably going to play as an outside guy. But 85th percentile success rate versus man. Now, it only happened on a small handful of routes. Like I mentioned, go routes, slant routes, corner routes, post routes. He was good on those patterns, but that's about it. There's still more development that needs to happen with him as a route runner. However, we saw Christian Watson come into the league last year. Very similarly, was a limited route runner. Was a guy who's not going to be a traditional full field separator, but is great in space and can beat you over the top and can beat you on crossing routes. I think Quentin Johnston can be great in space, can beat you over the top, and can win on crossing routes. So with Christian Watson, it was a slow burn, right? I haven't found myself, like in a traditional redraft sense, best ball is obviously a different animal in and of itself, but I don't know that I'm going to be drafting a lot of Quentin Johnston because I could see him, not getting off to a hot start in the first 4 weeks or something like that. But after his bye week, later on his rookie season, I could see him maybe not again being a traditional number 1 receiver, but being a huge big play guy with Justin Herbert in this offense.
Yeah, and one of the key things in best ball, being quote a best ball expert, is it's about value because you need to advance, but it's also about stacking the team so that it has upside week 15, 16, 17, because that's where all the money is. Right. So, the problem is Quentin Johnston going in the 7th, 8th round makes it a little more difficult. I like the player, but I struggle to fit a lot of these rookies in. But again, if I start 3, 4 rookies and I can have him be my 4th rookie, 5th rookie, and, it's going to be a heavy 0 running back team, I love that kind of upside. And I think that's kind of what you were saying. I also want to talk more on the Chargers because Keenan Allen has always been a favorite of the fantasy community. He's always been great with reception perception. But how did Keenan's RP look last year? How much of it do you think was injury? And do you think that is a sneaky upside for Quentin Johnston?
He's a tough player because you're right. I mean, he was a reception perception guy for so long. From 2015 to 2020, he was somewhere between 77.6% success rate versus man and 76.6% success rate versus man. Incredibly consistent and incredibly good. But then in 2021, he fell down to 74.2%. I was like, okay, maybe this is a blip. It's not that big of a drop. 74.2% is still a very high number for success rate versus man coverage. Then last year in 22, it drops down to 66.9%. And obviously, you mentioned the injury. The first 4 games back were really not good for Keenan Allen from a getting open perspective. Man press coverage especially, very problematic. It did get better. I posted about this in the Discord, which I know you're an active member of the Discord, and I appreciate you being in there. Those first 4 games were definitely worse than the last 4 games in the reception perception sample. Now, when you just look at his overall profile, you put up the route tree there. He's still got pretty good success on slants, curls, those shorter routes. I think that's probably where he has to live at this point. I think he was like about a 50-60% slot guy last year. We need to see him in the slot full time. We need to see him off the line full time. You really can't line up in that X receiver spot at this point anymore. He needs to almost exclusively be a slot guy, 80% slot, 80% off the line. I think you could still get some good years out of Keenan Allen because his success rate versus zone, 79.7%, is not that bad. Great example of what we talked about earlier. Like, we can get him in good situations as long as he's a slot and flanker receiver. But I think his days of being like a number one receiver are probably over at this point with the age
and he's being
concerns.
drafted as one. He's being drafted in the mid-third round on a half PPR site. He's not really been a touchdown guy consistently. He's been a fade for me lately, and I think it was important that we covered that. Let's move over to the Browns.
Like, I think just last thing on Keenan Allen real quick is just I think he could catch like 80, 90 balls, but for like 850, 900 yards. The big plays are not going to be there. And, Todd, I think a lot of it is that people just look at the box scores last year and like, oh, he didn't lose anything because he was producing. Yeah, but did you watch the Chargers offense? That unit stunk. It's the same thing I have problem with like the Jerry Jeudy stuff right now. People are like, oh, he was wide receiver this, that, or the other in full games he played, or look at his, yards per route run against man coverage. It's like, yeah, but the offense sucked. Like, when the film doesn't back it up and the offense stinks, I don't really care about your production, right? Because you were like, great, Jerry Jeudy has 100 yards when they get blown out by the Rams 51-14 on Christmas. It's not as impressive to me as if you're actually
the reason is the reason is it's just natural for the defense to not be as intense in the fourth quarter when you're up 35 points. And it's easier to put up numbers in those situations. Let's talk Browns. A lot of analysts, myself included, Deshaun Watson's my number one owned quarterback. And, because he came back after a 2-year layoff, looked horrible. But I also, we've heard a lot about them throwing more. And I know Amari Cooper has been a guy that, RP has been pretty high on overall, and Elijah Moore has been one of your favorites, if I'm not mistaken. We're hearing good things out of Elijah Moore. Let's look at and talk about that Browns offense and your thoughts on how those two might work together or not work together to fit what the Browns might do.
Yeah, you're right. Elijah Moore, definitely a heavy favorite of reception perception. And Amari Cooper, he's actually a guy that has been kind of up and down throughout his career in reception perception. He gets kind of labeled as a great route runner. I think he's a very inconsistent player. I think he's had very up and down seasons overall. And then within the course of seasons and games, he's been inconsistent, which is kind of tended 100%. Towards these.
100%.
Like, right, people ask, like, why is he a volatile fantasy producer? Well, he's a volatile real life player. However, last year, I think he had his best season, and Todd, I don't really think it's close. 71% success rate versus man, 71.4% success rate versus press coverage. You see the unbelievable success rates there on out routes and dig routes, post route success rates really high. That's really where he was able to make money on play action throws in the Browns offense. I think that can continue this year. Obviously, it's always tough with him just, again, because of the volatility and the inconsistency with him as a player. But if he's the guy he was last year, he can still have a really big year for the Cleveland Browns. But, yeah, man, Elijah Moore, I think Elijah Moore could be better than Amari Cooper. Maybe not this year, but definitely someday. I think he could be a better player. And, you look at his career in reception perception, his rookie season, 75% success rate versus man. Second season, when he was, fighting with the team, all kinds of like a disaster situation, 72.7% success rate versus man and 75.8 against press coverage. Like, this guy has shown he could beat man press coverage. While playing outside, he's shown he could beat zone coverage inside. Again, this is from last year. His rookie season is incredibly impressive, but even last year as he's beefing with the team, picking fights when you're in the middle of a 5-game win streak or whatever it was, not a great idea. But curl routes, dig routes, go routes, all of it. Like, he can win at all three levels. I really love this guy as a player, and I think they can move him all around the formation to play slot, Z, X, and, move Cooper around too. You can move the other players around.
Which helps both of them.
Which helps both of them. Look, if Deshaun Watson's good, if he's not a disaster like he was last year, this offense is really set up to fly.
Yep, I love that. I've been buying when Elijah was in like the 11th, 12th, 13th round. I mean, I went through a period where I was taking an Elijah Wood share almost every day. I backed off a little bit now that he's in the 9th, 10th, but after listening to you, even though I had read the reception perception, hearing he could be better than Amari Cooper and having the support to back that up, I'm going to put him back to a full buy. I really think he's a huge opportunity this year, being drafted at the end, as a third, fourth, fifth wide receiver. I think the sky's the limit, and that offense as well. So I love that. And, another point I want to make, one thing that reception perception won't catch, and that most analysts won't catch, you can look at what happened with the Jets last year and ding him. But for me, I want to separate diva behavior that is normal for wide receivers from diva behavior that is abnormal. And honestly, while it's obvious he didn't handle it well, he was right. Why wasn't he getting the ball? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was open. So, yes, according to the code, he should have kept his mouth shut. But to me, that falls into the category of normal diva wide receiver. And because if you avoid every diva wide receiver, you're not going to have like 5 of the top 8 guys in the league, right? Like you're not going to draft Stephon Diggs. You're not going to, guys who, Antonio Brown during his heyday. I think that Elijah Moore's stuff fit more into the normal. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I'm with you that like by the code, it's not what you do. It's just not how you should have handled it. Right. But he was right. The quarterback play was poor and he was getting open. He's not as good as Garret Wilson. Garret Wilson was a better player. So I understand why things trended towards Garret Wilson, but look, he's a good, like Elijah Moore, again, just a good player that would have helped him win more games down the stretch if he had been fully kind of integrated in the offense. And, I think the Jets receiver corps could use one more guy like an Elijah Moore this year right now, but, they obviously did what they did.
It's all the more reason that I'm all in on Wilson. It's because, Lazard is just a guy. He's a jack. He's a
guy, yeah.
Right? And Corey Davis has shown flashes, but he's getting pretty close to just a guy too. Although, all right, good. So I agree with that. So now let's delve into one of the great mysteries of life, right? There's what happens when we die. There's why certain people are popular politically. And then there's why Tyler Lockett is going third behind DK, 4 rounds after DK Metcalf and behind JSN. Tell us about your Tyler Lockett love, whether it continued last year, and try and explain this mystery.
Well, I don't know about the mystery, man, because I'm with you. It's very confusing. And, you see Tyler Lockett, just an ability to win at all 3 levels, an ability to win outside, an ability to win inside. And, we've talked about Keenan Allen. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins. Allen Robinson obviously has shown signs of decline too, another player we talked about earlier. There's a lot of these like great receivers from the last decade who, they're getting into their 30s. It's showing some signs of decline. Tyler Lockett's not one of them, man. Tyler Lockett, I think, had his best season last year. He had his highest success rate versus man coverage of his entire career, 78.9%. Great against zone coverage, 83.4%. Great against press coverage when he saw it at 77.8%. Like, he was awesome. I was kind of hoping that him having that year with Geno, without Russell Wilson, would kind of cement, like, no, this is a top 10 NFL receiver. This is not like an inconsistent guy week to week. Russell Wilson was an inconsistent week to week passer. Like Tyler Lockett's boom bust nature, which obviously we don't care as much about in best ball, but it's always a thing people are complaining about in fantasy. He wasn't like that last year with Geno because he had just a more traditional NFL quarterback. And I think Lockett is special, right? And I maybe that would be the only argument of why you'd want to take him so much later than DK, who I like. I think DK is a great player. Great receiver. But I think you can make an argument that Lockett has, and yeah, JSN is a great prospect.
JSN did very well in your reception perception.
But I think you could make an argument that Lockett has been the best receiver on that team for the last 3 years, and there's no signs of a decline last year.
And he always goes 2 to 3 rounds later. It is one of those great life mysteries. You've mentioned Russ twice now. Well, once in the Denver offense once. Let's talk about two players who reception perception might want to make you hit the brakes on a little bit. And one already, I wrote this question before the brakes hit hard on one of them. But the two guys, as I went through reception perception, that there were significant questions about, one was Jerry Jeudy, and the other was Kadarius Toney. Now, let's not worry about the fact that Toney can't stay on the field, but talk about both of these guys and why the reception perception just doesn't back up the hype.
I like Jerry Jeudy as a player, but I think he has gotten significantly overrated of late. And I think a lot of it is that his collegiate resume was, this guy's a great route runner. He's a great technician. And he started off pretty good as a rookie. His rookie season, was up there around 75% success rate versus man, which I mentioned was a really important indicator. But he has slipped in each of the 2 seasons following. He has 70.6% success rate versus man last year is not a bad number, but he had a 5th percentile success rate versus zone. You can throw some of that on the coaching, and I don't think they were doing great stuff there in Denver, right? But he also wasn't necessarily running a full vertical route tree. He's running a lot of flat routes, running a decent amount of digs and outs and more intermediate stuff. I just think he is much like Amari Cooper, but a much more drastic degree. He's an inconsistent player, a volatile guy who's more of like a splash big play threat than a down in, down out consistent route runner. And the thing about Jeudy with this year, I agree that Judy's the best receiver on the Broncos roster, but he's going off the board 39th overall player. 39th overall player in best ball drafts, a top 20 receiver with a bullet. And, guys like Cortland Sutton, I don't think Sutton is great, but I don't think he's an XFL player. I was out on him last year. I was out on both of these Denver receivers last year because RP just wasn't backing up the hype, right? Like you said. And I was skeptical of Russ coming to Denver. I didn't know that was going to be an instant hit. Obviously, it went even worse than I expected, but Sutton is still
the only hit was Russ getting hit and sacked
over and over again.
Yeah.
So really, it's I think Sutton is an average starting X receiver. I think Tim Patrick is an average number 3 kind of slot utility man. They have Marvin Mims in the mix. They have Greg Dulcich in the mix. I just think it's tough to make the math work for Jerry Jeudy to get the volume that that would overshoot the talent that he is. So I just don't see it at all. And by the way, we're talking about this. I know that Sean Payton is about as big an upgrade as you can get from Nathaniel Hackett, but he's still got the same quarterback, Jerry Jeudy, that he did last year. So it's not as if he's got some big quarterback upgrade coming either, even if Payton makes things easier. So really just nothing matches up with Jeudy. And for Kadarius Toney, he's just never played real wide receiver. He's never been a route runner. He's never been a consistent technician. His success rate versus man and press were both below 55% in his first 2 seasons. Last year with the Chiefs, he was running almost exclusively, look at the route percentage chart. Look at how high the screen is. Look at how high the flat percentage is and how high the other percentage is. That's just all designed close to the line of scrimmage stuff. And by the way, Kadarius Toney can be really good in that role for the Chiefs because he's a great tackle breaker. He's freaky out in space, but what do we just talk about the gadget stuff? You're not designing an entire offense. You're not designing 130, 140 targets around that player. This stuff that he was going to be the number 1 receiver on the team. If that was going to be true, he'd have to be doing stuff we have never seen him do, either at Florida, in first year with the New York Giants, or last year at the Kansas City Chiefs, certainly. So even before the injury, I was all the way out on that guy from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, I took a little bit with Mahomes. But I was packing my Skyy bags pretty heavily when Skyy was 3 or 4 rounds later. I don't have a chart up, but Skyy was a very raw coming. It's funny, these post type sleepers. Skyy was so obviously raw from a small school, and everyone just put him in a role that he wasn't ready for. Now that he's got a year under his belt, and they let not one but two guys who started, played a lot of snaps, and Mecole Hardman and Juju Smith-Schuster are gone. We've heard that he's played all three positions last year, which to me signals that they see him as that guy, possibly. Your thoughts on Skyy Moore, and how did his RP show out?
Yeah, you mentioned the playing all three spots. That was a big part of his reception perception profile. Was he was playing a little bit of X, playing a little bit of slot, and playing a little bit of flanker. They're basically trying to get him up to speed with the NFL game, because you're so right that this is a guy coming from like Western Michigan, right? Like going from Western Michigan to Andy Reid's offense. That's like moving to a foreign country, trying to, learn the language, and also trying to figure out how to drive on the right side of the road. That's
and
a
work
lot
and work a full-time job.
And work a full-time job. That is like, that's a lot to process for a rookie receiver. So like there's this whole kind of like face planter theory for rookie receivers, which I think is nonsense when there's a good reason why the guy didn't produce. And there's a good reason why Skyy Moore didn't produce. By the way, his most likely best role in the NFL is as a slot flanker off the line guy, but that's Juju's best role. And I know people talk about Juju like he's trash because he was overrated after that second season. Another thing that I pointed out at the time, but he's like a fine, respected NFL veteran who could beat zone coverage. Skyy Moore as that raw rookie receiver is not just going to come and take that role in year one from Juju. That was never going to happen. So, but now that Juju's gone, that role is available. I really like Skyy Moore as a guy who can win on those short to intermediate routes. Is he going to get like 120 targets and be a top 20 fantasy receiver with Travis Kelce in that offense? Probably not, but I do love drafting him, and I will probably rank him ahead of consensus when the time comes.
Awesome. So many more we could do, Matt, but let's focus on which are some of your favorite sleeper wide receivers to take the next step and make that, put in a couple guys who are veterans and a couple, because the hype on these rookies is ridiculous. You're paying top dollar for Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, and I can't do it. I just don't have a lot of those guys. That's not how I do it, because I like to have a floor and a ceiling, and I think those guys are being drafted near, especially Addison, who's in the same offense as Jefferson. I mean, where's those targets coming from where he's going to crush his ADP? I don't see it. But give us a couple of the later rookies that you think, you mentioned one of my favorites in Mr. Mims. Give us a couple of who's the next tier that you think might be ready to break out?
I definitely think a couple guys to highlight from a rookie perspective is Zay Flowers. One, obviously he's a first round pick. People know who Zay Flowers is, but I'm a huge Rashad Bateman fan. I've been a fan of Bateman since his collegiate reception perception profile. I think if all things were equal and all these guys are going to be healthy, I think he'd be the best receiver on the roster this year. But we know that Bateman's already kind of had a rocky start to the offseason, so you kind of have to hedge your bets a little bit there. And I love Zay Flowers as a prospect. 73.1% success rate versus man, 72.7% against press, and he's a smaller guy, right? But he can play all three receiver positions. You see him making big plays at X, flanker, and slot as a collegiate player. A little bit mistake prone, will drop some passes, but a great explosive route runner and really good after the catch. I think Zay Flowers could be that guy that pops in the back half of the season.
And he's reasonably priced.
Yeah, I think I want to leave every draft this year with at least one of those Ravens receivers, because I love all three of those guys. Even Beckham.
I was just going to ask you. I just warmed up to OBJ. The last I read, he wasn't bad as a receiver. As bad as you might think as a receiver the last couple of years. Now you're talking 10th, 11th, 12th round, and I was a hard fade. A lot of guys like me were a hard fade. So embellish on OBJ a little bit for us.
Beckham is just, he's another one of these guys that you look back at reception perception history, and he has some of the best scores. He still has the number one success rate versus press score from his rookie season. like in reception perception history, 86.7%. And like people say, oh, he's never going to be that guy again. Well, yeah, no kidding. He's never going to be that guy. That was like 5 years, or that was, how many years ago was that?
2014.
Yeah. It was forever ago, and a billion injuries ago. But when you last saw him in 2020 and 2021 with the Cleveland Browns, and obviously then in 2021 with the LA Rams, I maintain that he was a really good receiver isolated from surrounding variables, especially, in 2020 with the Browns, 76.5% success rate versus man, 80 against zone, and 80.4% against press. In 2021, some of these are games with the Browns, some of these are with the Rams. 72.3% success rate versus man, 81.5 against zone. He's still really good. Like, he was really good the last time we saw him. It just, obviously, we have another injury question. He hasn't played in a year. If he's that guy, though, with Lamar Jackson in this wide open, potentially offense, like, yeah, we're talking about a pretty good player here. So I'm okay. Like, you could tell me that any of three of these guys lead the wide receiver room in targets and yards and catches and touchdowns, and I'd believe it. So I just want to take my shots on Bateman. I take my shots on Flowers and take my shots on Odell Beckham, because he's definitely, last we saw him, was still a very, very good player.
I'm a huge fan of Isaiah Likely's. I know you don't do tight ends, but he's another guy who can get open. I think the wheels are up on that offense, and I think that could be the title of this episode: Draft a Raven, wide receiver in every draft. Let's see. Give me one guy who has in those double-digit rounds. I know you're not done with RP yet, but is there a guy whose RP in the NFL last year was better than people realize?
Yeah, Nico Collins. I really like Nico Collins as an X receiver prospect. 71% success rate versus man, 74.5 against press, which is a really good number. And I think he was kind of starting to break out last year, Todd. He just ends up having that groin injury. And like, this guy literally played games with Kyle Allen last year. I mean, come on. Kyle Allen. What are we doing here? Now he's going to get a big upgrade in CJ Stroud. We typically don't expect rookies to like maximize guys.
South Park.
Honestly, you might have been. So I think like Nico Collins kind of fits in that X receiver bucket of a player that I really like, who can take that sort of next step with CJ Stroud. And I also really like Jacoby Myers too. And like, nobody's really thinking or talking about Jacoby Myers.
One of my favorite guys to draft in that range. Just so solid.
Solid.
Oh yeah. I love that. All right. So we got two really good ones there, guys. I've come around on Nico Collins after reading Reception Perception. I had heard a lot of my peers talk about him, and what got me to start drafting him was the RP. He is, I like CJ Stroud more than the consensus, I think. So I love those two. Last thing I want to ask you. Let's do a quick one, and then we'll do a last thing. We talked about some wide receivers who don't stand up to the hype. Are there any similar guys who showed warts? I want to just get your thoughts on Michael Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins. Just give me a short, thought on whether what RP showed on those two guys.
Yeah, with Michael Thomas, only a 3-game sample, obviously, but it is up on the website. And, the ability to beat man and zone coverage is severely declined from those peak seasons. And he was once like a great performer in reception perception. His 2018 season, I believe it still ranks second all time in success rate versus man coverage. So it's quite a fall off for him. Hopkins, definitely a guy that slipped a little bit against, we're seeing a little bit of a decline with him, but still very good last year at beating man and press coverage. His success rate versus man coverage at 72.2%, success rate versus press of 72.9%. I think he can still be like a fringe number one receiver. I think he's going to put a clear ceiling on Treylon Burks, who I still am like kind of not sure how I view Treylon Burks as an NFL player. So I think Hopkins is still definitely not at the prime. He's obviously declining, but he can still get open at a pretty high level, especially short and intermediate.
Yeah, I had a lot of Michael Thomas last year, and I've been fading him pretty darn hard, even though he's a little cheaper, because I don't see that upside that was once there, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was chasing that upside and reception perception. Again, it's good to have your own thoughts, and reception perception helped me to confirm what my eyes saw watching Michael Thomas. He was way more touchdown dependent. He just wasn't open. And I don't think Derek Carr likes throwing to guys who aren't open. I don't think he has that kind of confidence. Um, and last thought on that?
I mean, I agree with you, and I think all I'm hoping for from Michael Thomas this year is that he's good enough to be viable, so that the offense can be good, but that's just better for Chris
To help
Olave.
Chris
Really
Olave.
yeah, correct.
I like Rashid Shaheed.
Me
I
too.
don't think. Do you?
Yeah,
I was very impressed with his tape.
Yeah, just a few games sampled right now for him. I'm hoping to get a full profile on him before the season starts, but kind of like John Brownish a little bit. And people who followed reception perception for years know how highly I viewed John Brown. So
I loved John Brown back in the day, and Rashid Shaheed was a very, very early target for me in best ball. In early best ball, I was running about 20% Rashid. He was so cheap. He was just like free at the end of drafts. All right. So last thing I wanted to ask you, reception perception had a baby, so to speak. And that baby is new content in the form of another position. I have not gotten a chance to read it yet, but I know you're very excited about the addition. Discord, which, again, Matt mentioned it. When you join Reception Perception, you get access to Matt through his Discord. Tell us about what is new at Reception Perception.
Yeah, so kind of a random idea. I've known Derek Klassen forever on Twitter. I mean, like since the beginning of my time on Twitter. I know he's done great work with quarterbacks, and he's done a lot of charting work with quarterbacks. And I saw, a few months ago that he was leaving Football Outsiders, and we know a lot of people have left Football Outsiders since then. But I just kind of saw the post and was like, it'd be kind of cool if like Derek could chart quarterbacks for us, since I'm charting wide receivers. And people are always interested in adding me like doing tight ends and other positions. I'm like, I got enough going on with the receivers, but to find another guy who is spending as much time as I am with wide receivers, that is spending that much time with quarterbacks, and be able to add that charting data to the site. And by the way, like I myself have only just started to dive into it, because I had the idea and then passed it off to James Cohen, passed it off to our web manager, Zach Miller, who's just like literally the GOAT. I was like, all right, let's see if we can make this happen. And it did happen, and it's been great. So I've just started to like look at the data myself. Zach has been more like kind of forming it to the point to getting it to the website. But Derek just did tremendous work on these quarterbacks, and like I don't know if if people think this when they see my data, but when I saw how much Derek was charting, I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of stuff. This is a lot of work. So there is a ton on the site now about the quarterbacks and the sortable data tables, the player profiles. Right now, he's got 5 guys that he views like in that elite tier: Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, the top level guys. And then he's got at least, I think, 20 coming to the site. So pretty exciting times.
I am, as a subscriber, when you sign up and you think you're getting a good deal and then more comes than what you even anticipated, a whole new position group, finding edges, finding people before they're famous, finding Matt Harmon, and now Derek. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I normally don't gush over much, but I am just such a huge fan of what you're doing and how it's helping my game. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, Todd. And yeah, I think I just couldn't be more excited about Reception Perception right now. And, I think it's going to be a great football season. I host the Yahoo Fantasy Football Podcast 5 days a week. So I'm a busy guy. I love staying busy. But I hope people enjoy the work I'm putting out there, man, because I sure enjoy doing it.
The now married 2-dog moved back to the East Coast, Matt Harmon, at Reception Perception, at Matt Harmon _BYB. That's going to do it for this week's show. I wanted to thank Matt again. I want to thank our friends over at Underdog, and we will see you next week.